We'll move back to House Bill 747, and this, I believe, is Representative Baker is coming, and my notes indicate this is for discussion only, so we will not vote today. If the chair see fit, we will bring this back for committee possibly next week. But House Bill 747, no work requirement exemption. Representative Baker, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee. So this bill, the goal of it is to help North Carolinians who are receiving SNAP or FNS benefits to get back to work, or training to help them to get to work. And so, as you may know, the USDA, developed this whole program, and on their website they say this is intended to ensure that while no one goes hungry, the rules also reflect the importance of work and responsibility. And so the way the federal government sets it out is that SNAP has two sets of requirements. One set is just a general work requirement, and then one set is requires able-bodied adults without children. Okay, so I'll try and explain this, and then happy to answer questions. It's a little bit of a detailed, complex setup. But so this bill is attempting to address able-bodied adults less than age 60. And so within that, SNAP has a number of exemptions. You can be able-bodied under age 60 and not have to meet these work requirements. This bill does not change that at all. All the federal exemptions stay intact. And so by federal guidelines, in order to receive SNAP benefits, you have to do two things. You have to register, and then you have to participate in employment and training if the state assigns you. Okay, so it's a two-step program. You register, and then if your state assigns you, then you have to go through that process. So the federal government set it up this way to give states authority to operationalize the program. So again, registration doesn't mean participation. So in North Carolina, what we do right now is we simply register people. And we only assign the registrants if they volunteer for employment and training. And so the key with this is that not only are work requirements federal law, but work requirements are one of the most effective tools to lift people out of poverty. So we as a state need to help people who have signed up to go ahead and find that employment and training so that they can, both for their mental health benefits, for their productivity, and their abilities to be independent and take care of themselves and their families. So this is essentially what we're trying to do. And studies across multiple states have demonstrated how able-bodied adults leave SNAP by finding work, and they have seen their incomes triple by doing this. And there are 9 states that are doing it now, and some of those states do it for work requirements and able-bodied adults without dependents. Some states do it only for able-bodied adults without dependents. So it's a mix of those 9 states and how they do it. So in North Carolina, we right now require able-bodied adults without dependent children to work. We do not mandate the federal requirement that the general population under age 60 who is receiving SNAP get assigned so they can have employment and training. In only 15 of our counties do we do that, and it's all voluntary. And so this bill would propose that we enact the ability in our state to assign these people, and that requires DHHS to assign people on SNAP to have employment and training opportunities. And I would submit that we as a state, that's our job. These people are struggling and they are not able to find work. We've got 350,000 people that are on SNAP. We've got tons of jobs that are open, but we are not connecting those jobs and those people to allow them to get in a position of independence and productivity. So we have been working, this bill passed in the House. We've been working with DHHS. Some good questions are, what are the numbers? What will this cost? And it's been an evolution of DHHS trying to predict what this will cost. So what you should know is in the program, because the federal government wants this, they reimburse 100% for administrative costs. And then beyond that, they reimburse 50% of a number of other costs. And so this is what DHHS has been trying to figure out. Well, what will this cost us? What will this cost the state? The tricky part is when they try and project the cost, they're looking at the 15 counties that voluntarily do this. And arguably, the 15 counties that do this have high-level programs for their ENT. And by that I mean community college programs that have extensive and ongoing training, sometimes daily training. In the states that are just enacting this and with concerns for, what the fiscal responsibility will be, those states do very much more limited programs like work assignments. So you can at least get somebody to show up at Goodwill or a place like that where they can start learning the soft skills. So there is a range of what you could provide for these people when we assign them. The other thing you should know is when we assign them, if there are not slots available. So again, okay, if we're going to take this on as a state, do we have the slots? So again, people register, then they need to be assigned. Everybody's registering, but we as a state are not assigning them. So if you assign them, then is it their responsibility to find a slot? What if the state doesn't have a slot? If the state does not have a slot, they are exempted. So that adds to that exemption. It's considered a good cause for exemption. DHHS has suggested that we make that explicit in this bill, and we're happy to do that, to make it very clear that the state is not liable and the participant is not liable if we don't have a slot. Because again, the slot means we have some sort of program for them. It could be a very intensive program or a much more rudimentary program. So to be clear, that's the case. Right now in North Carolina, we have about 7,000 individuals that would be ABOD, able-bodied adults without dependent children. We have 300,000 who meet just under age 60 with or without dependent children. And so one of DHHS's concerns is, all right, well, look, if we make this available to those with the general work requirement, what are we going to do about if they can't afford transportation or childcare? So what you should know is the federal government pays 50% of those costs. The other thing to consider in that is of the adults under age 60, in the general work requirement, only a very small portion of them are going to need childcare, right? The portion of people that have children ages 0 to 5, preschool age, is small. So for instance, in the state of Texas that does this, so it's Texas, right? Think how big Texas is. They only allot $4,000 a year for childcare because that's all they need for their general work requirement because there are federal block grants and other things. So just, to the question of can we as a state of North Carolina afford to cover people who are on food stamps under the general work requirement for childcare or transportation, I think the evidence from other states would suggest that we can, that is not a huge cost. And also, if we can't provide the transportation or childcare, that person is exempt once again. So there's all these ways of fallout. I think what we would like to do is start this program and look at what it's costing and how many slots we are able to provide. If we, and then that will help us know over time how to budget. And but again, that is the concept of the program. It's something we haven't been doing, and it would really help our citizens to be able to get back to work and to have that kind of independence. So I'd be happy to open it for questions.
Thank you, Representative Baker. As you can see, quite a bit of information here. We had a lot of questions about the costs and things like that. So that's the reason, again, I'll reiterate, this is for discussion only. We will not take a vote today. So members, senators, questions or comments? Senator Batch.
Thank you, and thank you, Representative Baker, for the bill. A couple of questions. If I could share, have a series of questions, if Representative Baker's fine with that. Thank you. So the capacity with the Department of Health and Human Services, right, they already have 4,000 vacancies. I assume if we actually implement this bill, which seems like it would be statewide, do you know whether or not they'd even have the capacity as of right now to handle the influx of work that they have currently in this specific department that would be addressing that?
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. And that is something we're discussing with DHHS. So there are a couple things. Right now, these people have to be registered anyway. So that's already occurring. And so that's one of the things we're looking at. The other issue is that depending on the state, a number of states partner with their work partners. So those work partners do a lot of the parts of the assignment that could otherwise fall on DHHS. And so, so let's see, in terms of the 100% and 50%, that is part of what the 50% would help reimburse that. But that is part of what DHHS has tried to determine, in terms of what the cost of this would be.
Senator Batch, follow-up?
Yes, thank you. With regards to the transportation, if I heard you correctly, 50% would be reimbursed from the federal government. There are a number of people that have transportation issues, obviously, especially if we're talking about community colleges supporting individuals and trying to, of course, prepare them for the workforce. Is it your understanding, or is it in the bill? Forgive me if bill drafting needs to, the bill drafters need to answer this. Is the 50% reimbursable for any type of transportation? So if a person needs to use an Uber every single day to get to community college, how will that be reimbursed, and how does that look? Do people have to advance the cost first and then ask for reimbursement?
Senator Baker.
So that's a good question. The second part, I will defer to staff in terms of how it would be reimbursed. My understanding is the 50% reimbursement for transportation is quite general and broad, so it should be covered. The other part I would address is, and you're right, community college is one of the programs. It's one of the programs we do in North Carolina, and it's a great option. However, it is one of the more expensive options and more intensive time-wise and commitment-wise. So for instance, Utah has a general work requirement, and some of their employment and training options are that you register online for work, basically on their unemployment site, that you complete an online job skill evaluation, you attend a virtual ENT workshop. So all of those are non-transportation dependent. So I just want to make that point too, that I don't know. Oh, I hit it. Thank you. I just want to make that point too, that, while transportation is definitely important, there are options and opportunities. And I think any newly starting state would want to look for opportunities that don't require transportation, particularly in North Carolina, right, where we've got a lot of rural areas. We don't have a lot of centralized transportation. Some places don't have Uber, but it's a great question. And in terms of how the reimbursement works, I'll have to defer to staff for that.
Chair recognizes staff. Jessica.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jessica Boney, Legislative Analysis. So, Senator Batch, the bill doesn't speak specifically to reimbursement of transportation services. I honestly don't know, but I would be happy to reach to my fiscal colleagues and see if they can provide some more information on how it really works.
Senator Batch, follow-up.
Look, we talk too long, the mic goes off. That's the key. So with regards to the child care as well, we have a lot of child care deserts throughout our state, and sometimes even 50% costs that are going to be reimbursed will be out of the cost range for some parents. Do you know, with regards, and maybe this is a question for staff, right now there are child care waiting lists that happen across the state for people who are already eligible. They have not obviously been able to get off of those lists. is the bill, do these people jump the line with the other individuals that are already waiting for child care vouchers in our state, or is this a completely different system that will be set up per this bill for additional child care slots?
Representative Baker.
Yes. One point that came to my mind as you were talking also is in terms of reimbursements and federal monies for this. One thing I did not mention is that there's also the option that the federal government, for other states who are not doing this or not using all their funds, North Carolina can apply to the federal government each year to get more funds, even beyond the 100%. Even if we meet our 100%, they've covered our administrative, then we can get more. In terms of the child care and how the wait list would be prioritized, I will ask staff if they can answer that. I'm not clear on that.
Jessica Boney, Legislative Analysis. So, Senator Batch, like the transportation expenses, the bill doesn't specifically speak to child care expenses, and so my initial response would be no, that there's no priority given to these folks in terms of child care slots. But, you know, it seems, as Representative Baker has said, in working with DHHS to develop this program, I would really turn to them as to how that might be handled. But it's certainly something I could reach out, try to provide some more insight on.
Great, thank you. And just one more follow-up. Representative Baker, it looks like, if I've read it correctly, that this would be a statewide implementation. Would you be willing to consider a pilot in a rural area, in a couple rural areas, an urban area, to see how this actually would work in reality before making it a statewide program?
Thank you. And one follow-up to the child care. You know, again, I would say some of the other things that Utah does is they have the individual meet with an employment counselor once a month. So things like that would not require child care. So I think that's what we would be looking for, is to limit, the burden, both for the individuals and then, of course, for the state being able to reimburse that. As you say, we definitely have a child care issue. In terms of piloting, that's a great suggestion. I think what DHHS is offering is saying, look, if we're going to start this, let's start with a targeted population. It could be that they've said, how about just ABOD, the able-bodied adults without dependents? Unfortunately, the opposition to that would be North Carolina already requires that. It was suspended during COVID, but we already require that. So it's not really actually doing much outreach. So, so your suggestion is a good one. Other states have, instead of going just to the general work population, have targeted particular subsets, so whether it's by location or by some other demographic, which is, I think, a great suggestion.
Okay. Senator Adcock.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Baker, and thanks for that series of questions. Senator Batch, it sparked this. So when you're talking about whether to target a population, I think what you're asking for is proof of concept. How would this work in those places where we know the infrastructure is lacking? That seems like a really smart thing to do versus target a type of person, is target an area to figure out what the problems are. So I just want to support that idea for a pilot.
Yeah, thank you for that. And, I think the other thing is, as we discuss this, we see how we're concerned. It's like, gosh, if we were that person in that area trying to work, and again, these are people, they're struggling baseline, right? They're not able to do what they want to do. And so the likelihood that they have the resources that we might to go kind of pound the pavement and figure these things out is really even more limited. And so I think that's why it's so incumbent upon us as a state to say, okay, look, what does exist in your local area? When they come home, exhausted from trying to and managing kids or whatever they're doing, where are these resources? Who can we connect you with? What are the online opportunities? All of that takes a lot of research and effort and energy, and we would like to connect them and make that more streamlined for them. So I think it's a great comment, so thank you.
Thank you, Representative Baker. And we need to wrap up pretty quickly. Several of us are involved in conference budget meeting. Would remind you this is discussion only, so this will be coming back to us for more questions. I had Senator Robinson, if we could move rather quickly. We're supposed to be back at 10:30, so we're late now. So
Yeah,
Senator
just real quick, I agree with you. I think the beginning of the concept is good. However, I want you to also take in consideration that we don't have broadband in some rural areas in terms of computer access, so that's something we need to look at, as well as we want to train people for jobs that offer a livable wage. So I would really suggest that we really, instead of having the bill become effective when it goes into law, move it out in terms of when it's effective. So some of these questions can be addressed, whether we're going to pilot or what, rather than right away to move it out to another date, and you might work with the department on that. But I think the concept is moving in the right direction.
thanks, Senator Robinson. I think more of a comment than a question. Senator Mayfield, I saw you.
Yeah, I've got a series of questions, but I'm not going to ask those. My main question is, in addition to working with DHHS, are you working with any of the advocacy groups that already serve this population to help to bring them into this conversation so that, again, their perspective of working very directly with these folks on the ground is influencing and impacting how the bill is being developed?
That's a great question. I am somewhat relying on DHHS to help connect me to those, local important connectors. But happy to hear more about that. And also, since we are running out of time, would love very open if you want to send me an email with your questions, or we can connect in person. Really would be helpful, because it is a complicated, complex issue with a lot of challenges. And I think the more we can get good input and ideas, the better we can launch this. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Baker. And in closing, let me just remind you what Representative Baker said. If you have members who have questions, please direct those to Representative Baker by email or contact her personally about that. And this will be back on the agenda for more questions at the next meeting probably. So with that said, that's all the business we have, and this meeting stands adjourned.